Good morning, everyone. I can't help but feel the weight of those words. It is the most that we are all attempting to do, and it will be easier that we are doing it together. It's exciting for me to be here with all of you, giving up your Saturday, you're turning away from your families and your hobbies to be here to talk about literacy. There's nothing more important for all of us to be doing, in my opinion. It's exciting for me to be here in Topeka, because my very first public talk was about in third grade when they assigned the social studies assignment where everybody gets a state and then you have to research the state and give a presentation about it and stuff. So this is my first time to be in Topeka. I'm really excited because I know all about your state. I'm excited to be here because of the journey that we're on, and I hope to be able to inspire you with the responsibility, the obligation, and the opportunity that we all have right now as a country. And specifically in your state in terms of the footprint for literacy. This is an enormous opportunity that you have because of the attention and the funding and the support that's behind this work. You have an ambitious goal. I don't know if you're aware of it, but I thought I would put it on this first slide so that you can see what is in front of you. 85% of Kansas fourth graders are achieving at the basic level or higher on the Kansas State assessment by 2033. And anyone here who's a parent would say that that might not be soon enough, right? We hope to have that accomplished. But those of us who've been doing this work for a long time, Cindy and myself, it seems like a long time coming, and this is not the first trip to this potential destination. We have had other initiatives in my almost 40 years in education aimed at the same opportunity. Some people of my era have been discouraged by that. I'm not. I'm optimistic right now that we might have the stars aligning. We might have the things that are necessary to make this enormous and essential change in education right in front of us right now. So I think this is our moment, our opportunity to finally get this right for children. There's nothing more important. I said that already. Maybe I'll say it again too. I want to start by framing my talk about using multi-tiered system support as the mechanism for bridging research and practice. I want to frame the talk in the definition of the science of reading. Raise your hand if you have heard the phrase science of reading. Everybody. Okay. Raise your hand if you know there's a definition of the science of reading. Not everybody necessarily. So one of the things that's happening right now in education is a little bit of pushback about the science of reading. And so a group of us a while ago were convened by the Reading League to create a common definition, because we can't all be moving towards something if we don't know what that thing is very clearly. So we created a defining guide, an actual book, an ebook that you can download free from the Reading League's website that would give everybody the same definition for the science of reading. Everybody would be able to have a set of boundaries around what the science of reading is and isn't, so that we all know what we're moving towards, what we're trying to accomplish. So I encourage all of you to go to the Reading League's website and download the defining guide. In it, you'll see this definition, and this will help us to be communicating and talking about and sharing the same definition with everybody. So I've committed to putting this as one of the first slides in every talk that I do. I want to encourage you to do the same and have conversations with the people you work with about what is in this definition. It is packed with information. So it's meant to remind us that the reading research is not new. It's not a single study. It's not done, it's never done. Research is always ongoing. It's not a political agenda. It's not just about phonics. It's not even just about reading in English. It's not even just about reading in the US. The science of reading is international, vast body of a specific type of research, and that is research that's done in controlled settings where we can compare one approach to another and find out what works best. I think this is so helpful and valuable for educators, for classroom teachers especially, so that you don't have to hunt around for what to do. And it's not that we have the answers to every question facing teachers, but we at least have a starting place. And in many cases, teachers have not been given the information about what is in the reading research that can be their go-to first place to look when they are trying to do their very complicated educational tasks. So the science of reading exists. It has existed for a very long time. It gives us a starting place for the work that we're doing. And the part that I've highlighted in purple is what I think is the most important. So this assessment and instruction connection for the purpose of improving student outcomes. The science of reading is not an academic, abstract, esoteric set of studies, although that might be also the case. What we want to do is make sure that what's known in the research is known and available to every educator. It's not just about knowing. So in my opinion, one of the things that has happened over the last several decades in terms of educational reform is that we focused only on the knowing. So let me start. How many of you would say that you learned about the science of reading in your educator preparation program? Raise your hand. Learned about the reading research in your prep program. We have one. That's more than what we typically have in a group this size. It's not common. So knowing is certainly essential. Learning about what is in the research in terms of how children learn how to read, what can go wrong during that process, how we can prevent reading difficulties and how we can intervene when something goes wrong. Knowing that information is essential. So yes, we have the knowing doing gap. We need all educators, teachers particularly, but all educators to know what's in the reading research. But where I think we have fallen down in the last couple of years, couple of decades, is not just about the knowing part, but about getting the systems right so that we can act on the information that's in the research. So my talk is focused on what I think is the framework for delivering that reading research, multi-tiered systems of support. And I'm going to do my best to describe that model, perhaps in a way that's different from how you have heard it talked about in the past or the way you thought about it. I'm going to be challenging you to think about every single student living within nested systems, within their families and communities, within their school environments, and to think about how we get the conditions right so that each and every student has that opportunity to be lived in through literacy. So this is the way that I'm seeing the world now, is in the shape of a triangle. Because I think this is the piece we're missing in a lot of legislation, in a lot of the really well-intentioned efforts that we have around the country to improve literacy outcomes. We don't have enough about the contexts, the what some of my professors way back when called host environments, the realities of schools. We're not having enough conversations about how do we take what's in the reading research and actually make it reality for children within the complicated host environments of our schools. So that's, I'm saying this as a public goal. This is what I'm going to intend to try to convince you of today. And then to ask for your help in talking with people you work with about these topics. So that's the goal. So I want to start with what got me into all of this work related to reading, and that is the finding in the reading research that I now think is the most important. And that is the fact that most reading difficulties can be prevented. Obviously, dyslexia and other brain-based reading disabilities cannot be prevented, but the earlier they are identified and supported, the outcomes for students can be influenced and changed. And so prevention and early intervention are essential, but prevention is not sexy. We know this just as human nature, right? You've heard those studies about how much it takes to house and feed and clothe inmates versus what it takes to get students in preschool to have sufficient early literacy skills, right? We don't tend to put our effort and money and energy into prevention. Just something about human nature. We're dealing with it now, what's confronting us, the urgency that's immediately in front of us. But when it comes to reading and literacy, we need to be doing business very differently than the way that we are. We've had third grade legislation for a long time now, where students in many states are retained if they don't pass a certain level on a statewide achievement measure by third grade. And we know in the research that third grade is like, it's not too late, it's never too late. But third grade is not the place to focus. We should be putting our energy and focus into what's happening with infants and toddlers, into what's happening in preschool, and most certainly into what's happening in kindergarten and first grade. So this graphic is an illustration of what tends to happen when students are being measured on reading comprehension as they go from kindergarten through sixth grade. So it's depicting the performance of many tens of thousands of students, with typical readers shown with a green line drawn through their median performance, and struggling readers with the red line. What do you notice when you look at this? Tiffany's not allowed to answer because she's been in my classes. What do you see?
Struggling readers are not catching up to physical readers.
Yeah, the students are not catching up. The struggling readers are not catching up. What else is happening is the difference between struggling and typical students.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
The gap gets bigger over time. You've all experienced this, especially those of you who worked with intermediate and secondary grade students. When does that gap start?
Kindergarten.
It's happening in first grade. By the end of first grade, the students who are struggling readers, these are two very distinct groups. And the students who are struggling are making a little bit of progress each year. And some people are really knocking themselves out to get that little bit of progress. Interventionists, private tutors, special educators, but they're not typically making the kind of life-altering progress that allows them to catch up to that sort of average or typical performance of students in their grade. And so the gap getting bigger is important. It's not that we can't intervene with older struggling readers, we can. But what the research suggests is that what it takes to do so is very time and resource intensive. And again, many of you are doing this important work, you know that. But what we need to focus on is that there is this opportunity at the end of first grade, an opportunity in pre-K, kindergarten, and early first grade to change the outcome for every student. This is a known dividing line at the end of first grade. We know how many words correct per minute is related to reading comprehension, and we know the skills and how much of those skills we need to equip students with when they are in kindergarten and first grade, so that no one leaves first grade as a struggling reader. So in my work, originally in my career as a school psychologist, I was dealing with the other end of this graph, the right side of this graph, working with older students. Wasn't even thinking about reading really at all. I was focused on mental health concerns of older students in high school. But I had the experience of, regardless of what the quote unquote referral concern was, reading was somewhere at the heart of it. If it looked like a behavior issue, if it was focused on math, failing of classes and that sort of thing. It didn't take long to figure out that it was reading at a person. And so this idea of prevention is something that we need to elevate. What does this mean in a practical way? Devoting resources to kindergarten and first grade, not waiting until the summer before third grade to provide intensive tutoring and so forth for students. And making sure that we are providing that instruction in kindergarten and first grade, equipping those teachers in kindergarten and first grade with the information they need to be able to get every student reading at the end of first grade. So for me, the multi-tiered systems of support framework is the exact mechanism for making that happen. This was originally conceptualized from public health as tiers of prevention. So you're familiar with a 3-tiered model, I'm sure. Maybe you're familiar with this under the terminology response intervention or RTI. I'm not going to go into the weeds details of what's different between RTI and MTSS, but I do want you to understand the origins of a tiered model. So in public health, there are 3 tiers of prevention. So disease prevention, think about the flu or the common cold. Primary prevention is what we have everybody do that reduces the incidence rate, it reduces risk. So hand washing, staying home if you're sick, not sneezing on people, coughing into your elbow. Primary prevention of the flu. This is what classroom reading instruction is. It is primary prevention of reading failure. This is a huge paradigm shift, and it's not what many are talking about when they talk about or hear about multi-tiered systems of support. And I would argue that even in some of our legislation currently, aimed at making change for students in schools around literacy, that we are not focusing properly on first reading instruction. And what I see happening around the country is a lot of screen and intervene. So it looks something like this. We might have a mandate that all students are screened around literacy issues. And that's important, by the way, because when I started in education, A, we didn't have the tools to do universal screening. B, we didn't have legislation that mandated it. So this is an important advancement. But I think we are missing out on the opportunity when the screening is seen as a way to put students into intervention only. Certainly some students need intervention. We can talk about that. But what we're missing out on is this primary prevention of reading failure that happens in the regular classroom, and how do we build systems around that classroom so that the teachers can be more effective with reading outcomes. So screen to intervene, as I'm experiencing it, is something like universal screening, and then based on a score on screening, students are, this is the way that people talk about it, sent to tiers. Driven to tiers, send them to a tier. Okay, so this is the way it often plays out. Students who score on track on the universal screener, this is the way people talk about it, just get tier 1. Okay, we're going to talk about this. Everybody gets tier 1 because tier 1 is universal instruction. But this is the way it plays out. If you're on track on screening, say one more thing, right? Where's the guy with the X? You. So I'm gonna give him an X. I said the list is too long. One of my X is calling students by the tiers of instruction. So tier 1 student, you're a tier 1 student if you score on track. Everybody's a tier 1 student. If you score below expectation, you are a tier 2 student. The tiers are about systems of support, not students. And so now this sets up a very difficult situation in some schools, maybe you've experienced this, where there are more students going out to get reading intervention than are left in the classroom for typical reading instruction. That's happened in campus Missouri too. Yes. Okay. And then students who score well below expectation, are sent to tier 3. Okay, so I'm going to undo some of this thinking. I'm going to do my best to change this because it's an enormous missed opportunity. The greatest use of universal screening, which I think if I had to pick one innovation in the last 40 years that can change lives for students, it is universal screening. I worked for the authors of one of those tools for 12 years because I feel so strongly about this. So the missed opportunity here is to use your universal screening data to reflect the health and effectiveness of your classroom reading instruction system. Now, I'm choosing the words carefully because this is what I mean. It's not the responsibility of a classroom teacher alone. It is a universal system of support. So I'm going to be hoping to share with you some ideas, strategies, mechanisms for making that happen. Okay, so no screen intervene. Because what if you're in a system where 6 out of 10 students don't have a minimal level of literacy skills? What if you are working in a system where more students are at risk than not at risk? Or maybe it's not even this dramatic. You're working in a system where more than 20% of your students are scoring below expectation. And 20% is a broad figure because it represents about how many students can we provide intervention to in a typical school. So that's kind of the framework. Maybe you have Anita Archer who works in your school and you can intervene with many more students than 20%, but it's kind of a general ballpark. If you're working in a system with more than 20% of students who are at risk, your intervention systems and your special education system will be overwhelmed. And a lot of not helpful and actually harmful things happen in that kind of a context. And you're probably experiencing this. This is what I see all around the country. The focus is on intervention and not where it should be, which is the classroom reading instructional system. So the best use of universal screening data is to identify and quantify and observe the instructional context. Is it the fish or the water? This is the way I think about this. My friend Amelia Van Larson talked about this when I was working with her many years ago. That anybody ever had a goldfish at their house? You all have, I'm sure you have like state fair and festival where your children go to a fair and they bounce a ping pong ball into one of those little dishes and you have to come up. I'm not a pet lover. I hope that doesn't make me dislikable, but I can't take care of houseplants. Like I have heard enough time with humans in my house. I can't do any other living things like goldfish that I have to take care of. So we have a little fair festival on Labor Day in our neighborhood. And I have 2 boys and when they were young, sure enough, they would bounce that ping pong ball into that little fish bowl. Now they're like college age and I think they're bouncing their ping pong ball in the sun. Pretty sure. But they were well trained, they were little and they were and so then it was not my responsibility to take care of the fish, it was my husband's. We do have a dog and he takes care of the dog, which is the right way it should be. But sometimes that fish's water would be clouded and not look good. And one time our fish actually lost its pigment. Has anybody ever else had this happen? Our fish like started to turn white. And I was like nagging my husband, he said, change that water. So that's where Amelia's phrase is the fish or the water really resonated with me because that's where my husband and I were like, he wanted to take the fish to the vet because it's not anyone to do with the water. I wanted to say what I wanted. Was that fish losing its coloring because of something internal to the fish? Like it had something internally going on, or was it the environment? Was it the water that the fish was swimming in? Because boy, it was dirty and it had been too long since that water was changed. So this is the analogy that I now like to use for thinking about and stretching people to understand the instructional context. Universal screening data puts in front of you the instructional context. Yes, there are students with disabilities, absolutely the case. There are students with neurobiological differences in the way that their brains are wired that make it harder for them to learn to read. But not 60% of your school. So there's something about the instructional context that can change so that we get better outcomes for all students, and importantly, so that we can provide the intensive intervention support to students who do have reading disabilities so that they can actually thrive as well. So the best use of screening data is to define your instructional context. So teams at all levels of the system should be using the percentage of students who are at risk on your screener as the jumping off place for designing what reading instruction should look like in your school. I'm giving you an example. These are real schools. I'm sure the color coding will tell you what's going on here. In school A, about 60% of the students are scoring below expectation on screening, and in school B, only about 15%. These are two very different instructional contexts. And the tiered model, the instructional delivery system should look very different because of these two different contexts. It's not just taking the students who score below expectation and sending them to intervention. Okay. So beyond who is at risk to how many are at risk, using screening data to evaluate the health and effectiveness of your universal instruction. Because when you have more than 20% of students who are below expectation, do all the students need the same instruction? Should phonics instruction be done only in whole groups or ever in whole group? Should you implement a whole group instructional program with fidelity? Could you possibly provide effective intervention to all the students who need it? These are questions that we're not talking about and thinking about. So these are the questions I want to bring to your attention today. So let me just do a quick introduction to the way that I view the three-tiered model, and then I'm going to unpack in a great deal of detail, and I hope that you will bring your questions forward. Don't wait for me to pause and see if you have questions. Just feel free to jump in. Okay. So you might have heard multi-tiered systems of support. You might have heard MTSS described in a variety of different ways. For me, it's find out what your students need, that's screening. Give them what they need in the regular classroom, and then intensify support as needed, as early as needed, without asking the student to wait to fail, without requiring the student to jump through hoops. It's not a delay tactic. Intensive intervention can be provided immediately right after universal screening. So the idea behind MTSS is efficiently matching what your students need with the instruction that you're providing. Efficiently matching that so that you're not giving very intensive resources when a lower intensity resource would have done the job. So it starts with the low intensity environment, which is the regular classroom environment, what we call 2-1. We all are focused on students who have reading difficulties, but my horizontal lines on this graphic represent that MTSS is for all students, including students who are advanced readers or might be identified as gifted. The idea behind the numbers to the left-hand side relate to the fact that we can get every student, or just about every student, to grade level reading expectations, but not with the same kind or amount of instruction. This has been shown in the research for a very, very long time, and it's the piece that we need to be acting on. The only way that we're going to get to 100% of students reading at grade level expectation is if we start first with very few students who need intervention. So it's not about screening and putting students into tier 2 or tier 3 intervention. It's about shrinking the number of students who need tier 2 or tier 3 intervention with the first way we teach reading in the regular classroom. That's our best opportunity. That's where students spend most of their reading instructional minutes. It's our best chance to turn around the reading outcomes, to convince you of that. The model is not about assessing students and fitting them into an existing system. It's about assessing students, knowing what they need, and building the system that they need. That's what the multi-tiered system of support model is all about. You'll notice that there are blurred lines between the tiers. There's a lot of orange there, especially between tier 2 and tier 3. This is a framework. As my friend Judy Elliott says, it's a frame, not a box. Don't get rigidly boxed into, I'm the tier 2 teacher, you're the tier 3 teacher. This is our tier 2 program. That's our tier 3 program. So the tier 2 student can't get the tier 3 program. We're like not in local territory when we're having those kinds of conversations. The framework is give everybody what they need as primary prevention to shrink the number of students who need something more. And then later on top of that effective first reading instruction, the reading intervention system for students who do need more on top of the effective primary prevention system, on top of the tier 1 or classroom reading instruction. Okay, so I think I've said the things that I wanted to. Oh, the other piece of this that we're not often talking enough about is one of the main reasons this model was first conceptualized is to integrate the various forms of support for students in schools. Education is very siloed, from teacher, from educator prep, to the state office of education, to the district central office, to the individual schools. We are, I don't know, it's our tribal nature that causes all these silos, but we are loath to cross the lines in these ways, and that's not helpful for students. So the model was originally conceptualized as a way to integrate specifically general education and special education at all levels of the educational system. Not looking at this is a gen ed kid, this is a special ed kid, this is gen ed funding, this is special ed funding. Integrating all of the available supports for students so that they get what they need. Okay. Clarification or question before I go into some detail?
No, I just wanna like clap because
It's a funny position to be in. I said the other day to somebody that I feel like I'm having to justify that water is wet. Or like the sky is blue and the grass, like. These things are so like ingrained in me from day one of my graduate training that like, but I'm opening my eyes to realize that I and my colleagues have not done a good job over the last 30 years communicating these ideas because there's so much misunderstanding and we're wasting time on things that are not helpful. And sometimes that wasting time is in the name of MTSS, and so it's frustrating. Okay, so let me go a little bit deeper into the tiers. I'm going to do my best to clarify some misunderstandings. Yes.
I had a question back on the big model, because I teach secondary, 6th grade. And so when I look at screening data, I teach the tier 2 as well as the L6. And so I catch those 2 years, and then I have someone who takes care of the 3. But in that tier 1 environment, I've got kids going, in a very different environment, it's so great. But I've got kids in that same room with 99%.
And that's true at all levels of the system. The range of student skills is vast from entry in pre-K or kindergarten, right? This is one of the things that adds to the complexity. This is one of the things that has to be acknowledged and recognized and then met head on. We can't just keep thinking that we can teach to this mythical middle of performance. We have to teach to the actual students who are in front of us. And that's what you're raising. So, okay, so I'm gonna walk through a description of the tiers, just so we all have the same way of thinking about this. I'm gonna spend some time a little bit later on in the presentation unpacking what to do when your tier one instruction is not sufficient for your students. Okay, but we have to have like common understanding of the tier models to start off. So all students receive tier one instruction. It is universal. That means that nobody's coming out of tier one instruction to get their intervention or their speech therapy or their EL service. Everybody gets tier one. It's held at a certain time within the school day. And I would love for you all to start talking about tier one and classroom reading instruction as primary prevention of reading failure. This is what we do for everyone to reduce the reading failure incidents, to reduce risk, to get it right the first time with the first way to teach. Now, some people will get hung up on the number of minutes or who's delivering it or where it's happening physically within the school. I don't think any of that matters. But the sort of general broad brushstrokes that you'll hear people talk about in terms of time, something like 90 to 120 minutes every single day, protected time, kids are not sleeping during this time. Yes, you can have music in the middle of it, like you can break it up, right? But it's protected time in the schedule. We're not going on a field trip during this time. We are not having an assembly during this time. Every single day we're teaching reading for 90 to 120 minutes. I've worked with schools that get upwards of 90% of their students to grade level expectations with 45 minutes of tier one. And I've worked with schools that need 150 minutes. So don't get hung up in the number of minutes. These are broad kind of brushstroke. What you do during the time is more important than the number of minutes that you have. So this is the best opportunity to line up what's in the reading research with the instruction we're providing to students. Many schools are going on a shopping trip right now. They're just swapping out programs. And I think there's, some need to do that in some places, but that's not all there is to it. And we have to be really mindful, especially about those tier one, those core reading programs, because there really aren't any, there are very few on the market right now that have any evidence of working for anyone, anywhere, at any time. Many of them are new, they haven't been studied. So you have to be a really savvy consumer. I was gonna say a savvy consumer. The piece that I hear a lot of misunderstanding about right now is by design, tier one should be constructed to match the needs of your students. Students have different needs. The range of needs within your class within each grade level is wide. So one size does not fit all. We cannot expect to have to always only implement whole group instruction. That's not going to meet the needs of students. So by design, tier one instruction, classroom reading instruction, the ELA block, may have some skills that are taught in whole group and some that are taught in small group. And the grade level team or building leadership team will make the decisions about that based on student data. You will know if your tier one instruction is working, if it's causing the vast majority of students to reach grade level expectations. That's the standard you want to work for. People use 80% as the general idea. If you have 74% of your students at grade level, grades, nobody's going to quibble with that. Here's the thing I want you to understand. This means that 80% are getting to those grade level expectations with tier one instruction alone. That's what the model is about. No intervention is required. 80% of students get to those grade level expectations with the tier one instruction they are providing. That's how the model works. That's how we shrink the number of students who need something additional that need that tier two or tier three intervention. It's the job of a grade level or building leadership team to plan what tier one instruction should look like. Asking teachers to implement a core reading program with fidelity is not the best use of time. It's like a bumper sticker, a slogan that I hear a lot of administrators throwing around right now. That's not helpful. You need to know what your students need, where their current skills are, and you need to design a tier 1 classroom reading instructional system that meets the needs. This is what I mean by contextualizing what's in the reading research for the reality of your school system. This is what MTSS is. So, yes.
I know you cannot get caught up in a minute. And now you can turn is that all that's very.
So 90 to 120 minutes is a general guideline for K-3 for primary grade reading instruction. You'll see 60 minutes for ELA and intermediate grades up through middle school. High school is a whole different ballpark. We don't have as much history implementing MTSS in high school or as much research about it. It's obviously much harder to do in my high school setting, but so the amount of time, here's what I want you to walk away with. The amount of time that you need depends on the amount of time it takes to get your students to grade level expectations. So you might not need 120 minutes, you might need more than that. You have a lot of older struggling leaders. So tier 2 is strategic reading instruction. It is not for all students. The purpose is to accelerate the students who are not on track in spite of getting very effective first reading instruction in tier 1. We don't do screening and skip over tier 1 and just send kids to intervention, hoping that that 30-minute intervention is going to catch them up, because that typically doesn't work. Maybe in kindergarten, but otherwise no. Tier 2 is a second dose of research-aligned, targeted instruction, targeted at the needs of the students. It is an extra learning opportunity, so that picture of the triangle in the MTSS model is about stacked learning opportunities on top of each other within the school day, so that the lines, that red and green line, don't diverge at first grade, right? So we have to stack the learning opportunities and align them across the school day, within the school day, so that students' progress is accelerated and they catch up. So tier 2 is not instead of tier 1, it is in addition to tier 1. And it needs to be in small groups where everybody in the small group has the same instructional need. So let me contrast that to what I see often in schools, which is you are the reading interventionist of some sort, special educator or otherwise, and you're going to come to Mrs. Jones's classroom to take everybody who needs intervention from 10 to 10:30. Regardless of what the students in Mrs. Jones's room are struggling with, that's the time when the interventionist is taking them. That bogs down and makes ineffective whatever that intervention opportunity might have been. So the research is very, very clear about accelerating student progress being focused on meeting them where they are now, and then moving them forward as quickly as possible. And the quick part happens with the extra dosing. Okay. Now, in the old way of doing business, we used to have to get together. We called it an intervention assistance team in Ohio. We got together with a group of professionals, and a teacher referred to the team, and we developed an intervention for the student. Did you have anything like that in Kansas or Missouri? A student support team, a teacher-based team, they've been called different names. But the student by student problem solving doesn't need to happen in MTSS until you're at tier 3. So tier 2 is planned by the grade level team or by the building leadership team. You don't have to go student by student because you've got good screening and in many cases diagnostic data. So you know what the grade level needs, what the students in the grade level need for intervention. You don't have to meet about each individual student to discover it, is the idea. You'll know if your tier 2 system is effective if it causes another 15% of students to reach grade level expectations. Now, sorry, I'll go back to my pictures. My slides are somewhere as a PDF, somewhere in the app, or yeah, I'm looking, I know where they are, I'm not sure. But feel free to take a picture and blast it around on social media. So my image of the tiered model had orange area between tier 2 and tier 3. I'm not so interested in the difference between tier 2 and tier 3. I don't think it's really worth spending a lot of time on. It's a difference of intensity, which means the amount of time, the number of days, the individualization in terms of skill focus, the group size that allows for more opportunities to respond. Those are the variables that are the difference between tier 2 and tier 3. It is not necessarily a different program. In fact, there's nothing more confusing for a struggling reader than to have 3 different instructional programs across their school day. Shouldn't be doing that. We need to align those instructional opportunities. We don't need to think that if we're doing small group, it has to be tier 2 or tier 3. Small group lives in tier 1 also. We'll talk more about that. So what defines tier 3 is not the person delivering it or the room that it's delivered in or the program that's used. It's the intensity of the support. And the design here is for students who are already having difficulty, in a very small proportion of students who will always have, who are still non-successful readers, in spite of tier 1 and tier 2 that worked for the majority. Still going to have students who need very intensive support, and that is what the system at tier 3 is about. This is not necessarily special ed. Students who are on IEPs are served in all tiers, all 3 tiers. And there are students who are not on IEPs and never will be on IEPs, don't need to be on an IEP, who are getting tier 3 intensive support. It may be short term for them. So don't equate tier 3 with special education. And I don't think it's helpful to make it tier 4. That's my personal opinion. Some people like to say tier 4 is special ed. I don't think that's particularly useful because students with disabilities are served in every single tier. So how do you know what your tiered system should look like? How do you know? Well, it depends on what your students need. It's not out of a manual, it's not off of some website, it's designed to tell you what tiers are supposed to be. Your students will define and tell you what your tiers are supposed to be. And the tiered model might look different at different grade levels within a school, at different schools within a district, and certainly statewide across districts. Your tiered model will look different because it's based on the needs of your students. So how do you know what they need? You're going to need a system, a school-wide system of assessments. So in MTSS, we have to answer specific questions about our students. All assessment is question driven. If I have a question, I don't need an assessment. So the idea of a battery of tests, I always love that phrase, battery, you know, what other meaning of battery? It's not good, right? So, I don't like to think about that. Students, we can customize the assessment based on the questions that we have about students, individual students and all students. One of the questions we have to answer is which students are at risk. And because early intervention and prevention are so possible and important, we should be asking that. We should be doing universal screening to identify risk very, very early on. But it's not about the assessment, it's about acting on that information, right? We're going to talk more about that. But we also need to answer the question, which systems are at risk? How many students need support? This is the piece I really want to emphasize today. It's not just about finding individual students and sending them to tiered intervention. The proportion of students who are at risk informs what your tier 1 should look like. We can't just keep business as usual in tier 1 and expect a little bit of intervention around the edges to close the gap for students. We also need to have assessments, different assessments that tell us exactly what to teach us. Screening is, well, we'll get to that in a minute. We also need to know, is our instruction working in real time? Because we're on an important mission. We can't keep students in instruction that's not working for them for a single day. We need to know in real time, is instruction working? So formative assessment, that's progress monitoring. And then we also need that standard summative assessment, looking back, did students learn what I expected them to learn? Oh, here, it's the presentation. Sorry, clicking too quickly. Okay, so let's unpack some characteristics of screening, and I won't ask you to self-identify, but you can tell me by a look on your face. How many of the characteristics that I'm sharing match what is going on in your school? So universal screening is early warning system. It is like a check engine light on your car's dashboard. Which students and systems need support? Universal means it's given to all students. I'll just do all the clicks. So if you want to picture this, all the clicks on this slide. Given to all students. Now, there are some exceptions to that, which I'd be happy to talk about in the break. But because we're giving it to all students 3 times a year, it has to be brief. Jack Fletcher would suggest that means between 5 and 10 minutes per student. It doesn't need to be any longer than that. So if your screening takes 30 or 45 or 60 minutes of each student's time away from instruction, you're spending too much time on screening. It's not necessary. We need those minutes for instruction, not assessment. Screening needs to be standardized. Student A should have the same assessment experience as student C. This is one reason I don't prefer computer adaptive assessments. Also, as a topic I'll be happy to talk about at lunch, but I'm running short on time to try to pack it thoroughly now. I think the most important characteristic of universal screening is that it indicates what the research has shown are the non-controversial areas where the research converges. Those 5 essential early literacy skills: phonemic awareness, phonics, text reading fluency, vocabulary, oral language, and reading comprehension. We have scans of research that tells us with those skills, students become readers. Without those skills, they're likely to struggle, almost certainly going to struggle. Those are the things we should be screening students on. That's a research-based screening opportunity. So those screening tools also should be like a crystal ball into the future. Rather than a norm referenced screener that simply tells you how the students score relative to other kids who took the same test, I prefer criterion referenced screeners because, as smart people before me said, it's not just about how are students doing with their reading skills, but do they have enough of those skills to be okay in the future? Does the amount of their skills predict good reading in the future? That's what we need our screening to do for us. So here are those 5 essential early literacy skills that I mentioned, just sort of contextualized within the simple view of reading. For prevention, we equip students with these skills sort of from left to right on this graphic. And for intervention, we're working backwards through the same sequence of skills for older struggling readers. We're not doing something different for the older struggling readers. We're going to use exactly the same indicators to screen them on, and then work backwards to find that lowest skill where they are having difficulty, sort of the root cause, if you will. Okay, so screening is an important category of assessment. You have to have this in an MTSS model, but it's not sufficient. Because of all those characteristics, being brief, indicators for one, you're going to also have to have a different category of assessments called diagnostic. They serve a different purpose. There's no overlap. Like if you had a Venn diagram of screening assessment and diagnostic assessment, they never meet. There's no overlap. These are 2 distinct assessment purposes. You will need 2 different tools for these 2 different purposes. You cannot use a screening tool to do the purpose of diagnostic assessment and vice versa. Now, what gets really confusing here is that people name their tools screener when it's a diagnostic. Okay, so one of the ones that I love, 95% group, is here. I think I have a picture of theirs. The PSI, extremely helpful tool because it's a placement test into their extremely effective phonics lesson library intervention system. But the PSI, it stands for phonics screener for intervention. So this is why people are confused. Is it a screener? Is it a diagnostic? Always go back to the question, is it on time? Is it in depth? Is it meant to tell you exactly what to teach next? Then it's a diagnostic, even if it has screener in the tool, in the title. A couple of other examples just to differentiate. I'm not selling, I don't get any royalty for mentioning any of these. Really Great Reading has a free diagnostic beginning and advanced coding surveys that you can access online. It's harder to find diagnostics of comprehension and the language comprehension skills. One that I helped to research when I worked at Acadians is their diagnostic of comprehension, fluency, and oral language, CFOL, CFOL for short. And the diagnostic tools, as I mentioned, that I really like, are the ones that function as placement tests. So this is an example of the placement test for corrective reading, which I think is one of the most effective instructional programs that anybody can use. And there's lots of research to back up that belief. So diagnostic assessment, not for every student, only needed when you don't know what to teach next after screening. If you have a curriculum-based measure for universal screening at the beginning of kindergarten that tells you that students are having difficulty with phonemic awareness, for example, or letter naming, you don't need a diagnostic to follow that. You should start teaching what, everyone?
Phonemic
Phonemic
awareness
awareness
and letter.
letters, right? Like, so there are certain scenarios, grades, times of year where you don't need a diagnostic at all. The third purpose of assessment in an MTSS model for reading improvement is progress monitoring. Whoops. There is a lot of overlap between screening and progress monitoring, and I really like the screening tools that have alternate forms. The same tasks that are used for screening are used for progress monitoring. The characteristic here is that it should function to tell you in real time, is the student learning? As you are teaching them, you're getting this frequent feedback about, should you keep teaching the way you're teaching and what you're teaching, or should you make a change? This is the purpose of progress monitoring. It is not documenting failure. So the reason to do progress monitoring is to enable learning. It is to give you feedback about, should you keep teaching what you're teaching and how you're teaching it, or should you make a change to your instruction? The only reason to get that information about students is so that you can make a turn on a dime, like not wait until the end of the year and find out, oops, they didn't make it, or even wait until the middle of your screening and find out, oops, they didn't make the goal. But so that you can change quickly in real time if that's necessary. The aspect of progress monitoring that many people don't think about is its use for evaluating intervention systems. So without going into a lot of detail, the concept represented on this picture is group progress monitoring. So here's the idea. If you are graphing your small group on a piece of graph paper, okay, it doesn't have to be anything that's digital. You can lay out the graphs for the 4 students in your small group. So here you're looking at on the same data series, 4 different students who are in the same small group. They all started out below expectation on the same scale. And over time, pretty early on, 3 of the students started to take off with this small group instruction, but 1 didn't. This is a good indication that that 1 student needs a change to instruction. Maybe it's more intensive support, maybe it's a different kind of a change. But this is the kind of evidence you need before intensifying support. Because what I see often happening is nobody is growing with the tier 2 intervention. Nobody is closing the gap, nobody is catching up. And then the response is to have the student then go from tier 2 to tier 3, or to refer the student for a special ed eval. When really it's about that instructional system. If nobody who's getting your intervention, tier 2 intervention, let's say, is having their progress accelerated and they are catching up so that they exit tier 2, they don't need any intervention anymore. If that is never happening for anybody in your system, it's not the student's fault. It's something about that instructional context. It's not the instructor's fault either. There's something about that instructional context. Okay, so group progress monitoring to evaluate the effectiveness of that instructional system, that intervention system, is what I want to highlight there. Okay, I'm gonna move fairly quickly through a couple of other system level variables that sit at the base of my MTSS cone. So I forgot to point that out, but I'm not a graphic artist, but my image of the three-tiered model is three-dimensional to me. There's a base to its own. So what sits there is that tiered model, the assessment system. Professional development is component number 3. And what I want to highlight here is that many states are doing a very good job of bringing what's in the reading research to teachers, but not so much other educators in the system. So if you have an opportunity in your school district or state to influence that, I would encourage you to make it available, that professional development about the science of reading, available to administrators and all the related service folks working in your school. And it's not just about the content knowledge. There's a lot of professional learning that needs to happen around assessment and around collaborative problem solving, which I'm going to unpack in just a minute. So that is, that's next, okay? This is the backbone of the tiered model. This is the steel rod that goes up through that three-tiered triangle, or in my case, cone. This is the piece that many people are not doing. My terminology for this thinking process is collaborative problem solving. This is what I learned originally. I still think the term works. You might call it database decision making or database individualization or what other terms do I hear? Continuous improvement planning. This is the work of teams at every level of the system. If you don't have a team using data in a structured decision-making model, you're not doing school-wide early literacy. You're not doing MTSS. And this is exactly what I see happening all around the country. People say we're doing science of reading, but they're not doing this thinking process for making decisions about analyzing the instructional context so that you get it right for students in the regular classroom in tier 1 from the get-go to minimize the number of students who need intervention. So this is a simple application of using science to solve problems, to prevent problems for students in schools. It's not specific to reading, but it definitely applies. We collect a lot of data in schools, we don't often use it. So this structure allows you to have one set of 4 questions that is guiding the work that you're doing at your school district level, at your school building level, at the level of the grade level team, and when you are talking about an individual student who's a struggling reader. And you're probably used to doing something like this about individual students. You might not have these exact steps or questions or decisions, but you're doing something like this when you're developing intervention plans for students. What I'm suggesting is that we need to be doing this to design an intervention for our system. We need to be using aggregate screening data, specifically the percentage of students who are at risk on screening, to reflect the health and effectiveness of the tier 1 system of support. So the problem that you might define when you do universal screening data might be, we expect 100% of our first graders to read for reading at the end of the year, but right now, only 62% are meeting that expectation. And then you move into analyzing why is that happening? And that's where I'm going to go next. What could you do about that if you find yourself in that situation? So I'm going to move quickly through the slides here on teaming. I just want to make a couple of important points. So if you want to take a picture here, right? I'm going to go quickly through these slides. At the district level, the representation of all stakeholders, including families and community members, on a district team is essential. The job of that district leadership team is to get the conditions right in terms of personnel, policy, and funding. Get the conditions for improving reading results right. Listen to the building teams, listen to the school teams about what their barriers are, And it's the district's job to eliminate those barriers using that problem-solving process. It's the building leadership team's job to listen to the grade level teams about what their barriers are and systematically eliminate them. So the building leadership team is talking about schedules and resource allocation and selection of instructional materials and professional development. Their job is to help the district achieve their literacy goals by getting the conditions right for every educator in that school. I don't see this happening. The grade level team, everybody who supports the grade level, not just classroom teachers. So here's where things get tricky. We have to have time, planning time. We have to have the opportunity for everybody who supports that grade level. We need to have everybody's voice represented, including families and community members, in the grade level team where we are using screening data to engineer a system of increasingly intensive instructional supports that starts with tier 1, getting the vast majority of students to grade level. Then, when we have reduced the number to something like 5% who still need intensive support, we can talk about individual students. Having a problem-solving meeting, like I described, that 4-step process about an individual student is very time and resource intensive. It looks something like this. And I don't want to have to do that time and resource intensive problem solving with very many students. It can't be effective with individual students if we have a lot of students for whom we need to design intervention. I'm saying it 1,000 different ways, hoping that one will be the one that you take out of here today and repeat to the people you work with. So rather than only intervening with individual students, we need to design system level interventions. Now, if you find yourself in a situation that you're not alone, many schools are in, where we are not getting 100% of our students to our minimum reading expectations, you're going to need to design an intervention for that tier 1 classroom reading primary prevention system of support. And I'm going to shortcut things for you. And be really short because I've taken too much time already. Shortcut things by giving you 5 considerations. In my experience and in my understanding of the research, these are the things to pay attention to. Okay, so I'm going to go fairly quickly through these, so I can give you a couple minutes to ask questions. There's been, as I said, a lot of effort around increasing every teacher's knowledge of what's in the reading research. I want to highlight 2 aspects that are not always emphasized enough or as much as I think they should be. And I'm going to just say a few sentences about each. I can do a full day talk on either one of these, but it's just a few sentences. Explicit, systematic, direct instruction works better for novice and struggling readers than minimally guided, constructivist, student-led, inquiry-based, problem-based learning, period. It works better for novice and struggling people on any topic. It's not specific to reading. So we need to learn about this. We need to acknowledge this. We need to stop having to talk about this. The evidence is crystal clear. There are a few things that we know as much about, and this is not from education primarily. This is from cognitive science and from educational psychology and so on. When a student is new to learning something complex like reading, or they are an older struggling reader, the fastest route to success is to directly, explicitly, and systematically teach them the skill. This is related to the other little known concept from cognitive science that I think is essential for every educator to understand, and it's called the learning hierarchy or the instructional hierarchy. Children don't learn to read through observation or exposure. It is not natural. It's not emerging. We shouldn't just wait for it to happen when they're ready or mature enough that it will emerge from it. We know this is true of all complex human behavior. If you have children, they probably rode in the car with you for 16 years and observed you and were exposed to you driving that car. But on the day they turned 16, you did not hand over the keys to your vehicle. Because exposure does not teach this type of complex human behavior. Same is true for reading. Second component to consider, okay, so let me back up a second. If you are not getting upwards of 80% of your students to your grade level reading expectations with the first way you teach reading in tier 1 only, then a place to explore for change is in educator knowledge. Okay, broadly and specifically in terms of the 2 things that I highlighted. A second thing to explore is about the amount of time that you have available for classroom reading instruction and how you are using your resources to support not intervention, but tier 1. Well, that's really small. This is an illustration of a K-3 schedule. So each column left to right is a grade level K-3. Where they use their adult resources flexibly across all eds, gen ed, special ed, compensatory ed, to support what was happening in tier 1. And they staggered their schedule throughout the grade levels so that the small group portion of tier 1 was at a different time of day for each grade. So these teal circles show you that staggering, so that other adults in the system could push into the grade level to support that differentiation, so that students were getting tier 1 instruction that was matched with what they needed. And the other adults were able to provide that in this staggered schedule. And then the purple circles show how that tier 2 or tier 3 intervention was an extra dose for someone who needed it at a different time of day, also staggered throughout the schedule, so that those additional adult resources could be used in a maximally effective way to get all students to be successful readers. You know, as soon as you do screening, what the grade level needs, what the students in the grade level need in terms of what they need in tier 1 and what they need for intervention in tier 2. So I encourage you to lean on the simple view of reading when you're looking at your screening data and making decisions about how to design tier 1 instruction. From day 1 of kindergarten, students need explicit and systematic instruction in word recognition and language comprehension. Those 2 broad capacities are what's required for reading comprehension to take place. So we can use that simple view as a guide for thinking about what our students need. And when you have a wide range of student skills on screening in word recognition, it might make sense for you not to do whole group word recognition instruction. If your students on screening are all scoring in a similar way in terms of the word recognition skills, whole group instruction makes sense. But again, this is a data-based decision. What are we going to teach in whole group versus small group? Differentiating not just the intervention piece, but also what's happening during tier 1. Making use of every instructional minute and viewing tier 1 as primary prevention of reading failure. So within that same kind of framework, thinking about the simple view of reading is just showing the same schedule that I was showing earlier. This is their first grade example, what they were doing during tier 1 instruction, where they had 90 minutes. And because of the needs of their students, they were providing whole group language comprehension instruction, largely through read aloud and discussion, because 60% of their first graders couldn't read text. So they weren't spending time in independent reading or reading to self or reading to a partner or reading to a stuffed animal. They were spending time building language comprehension, whole group, heterogeneous group, through very complex and intentional read aloud and conversation. While at the same time, they were teaching the word recognition skills in a way that was targeted to where the students' skills actually were. So students were not being bored, learning things that they already knew, and they were not being unreasonably challenged, being asked to do things that they didn't have the prerequisites for. So, and now comes the snarky part. If you were feeling drowsy, it's my itch back to attention. I'm gonna be snarky because I want your attention. I want people to think about this. Here's what I see a lot of happening around the country. Are you familiar with this phrase, win time? What I need time? A lot of schools use win time, stands for what I need, as a descriptor of their intervention system. What they're doing at tier 2 typically, where they're doing an excellent job using screening and diagnostic data to identify what students need, put them in skill-alike groups, get all the hands on deck, flooding the grade level so that there's an adult with every single group. Some groups are big, some groups are small, but everybody's getting instruction that they need. The problem that I'm observing, first and foremost, is this is not causing kids to catch up. And I think it's because they're layering this intervention on top of what I'm calling widening time. But I don't even need. That's the start part. What I don't even need. So this really excellent approach to intervention happening at tier 2. But expecting that little bit, 20 or 30 minutes, or even 45 minutes of intervention to make up for spending 90 to 120 minutes in instruction that is misaligned with the student's skills. Typically all whole group, even word recognition instruction that's whole group. Now, if whole group instruction works to get every student to grade level, you should keep doing it. But if it's not working, you should think about doing something different. And the tiered model is a different framework. It's something different you would consider doing. Where tier 1 is what I need, and tier 2 is another dose of what I need. That's what the tiered model is designed for. Not business as usual, whole group. We're just teaching, out of the box. It's February 12th, so we're on page 162. But customizing and building a tier 1 system of support that matches the needs of your students. This is our best opportunity to accelerate progress and catch students up to grade level expectation. So this is an illustration of, and I can't point to just my screens. I'll try to talk you through it. This is an illustration of what I mean by acceleration. This is what the tiered model is designed to do. This is why differentiating tier 1 could be a helpful solution if you find yourself with too many kids who are struggling readers. Let's say you have an instructional program and we're looking at 20 days of what that is. And on, no, I can't even see it. On day 1 of this instructional sequence, lesson 20 is a good fit for students like student A. Lesson 20 matches what students like student A are ready to learn next. They have the prerequisites for it. It's the next thing in the scope and sequence for them. But student B doesn't have skills that match what's in lesson 20. Their skills match what's in lesson 1 of this instructional program. Okay, just as an illustration. So in order to catch up students like student B, I am going to have to provide more and better instruction. And the more part comes from directing the instruction to what the students need all throughout the school day, starting in tier 1. So on day 1, student B is going to get lesson 1 during the tier 1 time of the day and lesson 2 during the tier 2 or 3 time of the day. And on the second day, the student B is going to get lesson 3 from this program during their tier 1 time and lesson 4 during their tier 2 or tier 3 time. And on day 3, student B is going to get lesson 5 and 6. This is the kind of stacking on and aligning of instructional opportunities that it takes to accelerate progress and catch students up. using all opportunities within the school day lined up to what students need. So by the time we get to the end of the 20-day sequence, both students, A and B, are ready for lesson 40. Now, this is an illustration, right? If it's an older student, it's gonna take a lot more than 20 days to get them caught up, but the concept is the same. Stacking the learning opportunities and aligning them within the school day. More time of the school day directed at what students need. Okay, now I'm gonna skip through these next few slides because you all know this stuff about direct, explicit, evidence, aligned instruction, you know what it looks like in to integrate across scale areas in a good structured literacy word recognition lesson. And you're not just phonicators, as these notes would say. We're doing the same direct and explicit instruction of the language comprehension skills. Okay, here is the larger size version of what I was showing earlier to illustrate that differentiation and flooding of the grade level. So this is the first grade example from Sharon Dunn's school in California. There were 4 first grade classrooms. They took their screening and diagnostic data and grouped students according to their skills, their current skills in the area of word recognition. She specifically hired additional para-educators and trained them in the same instructional program that the teachers were using. And the students with the biggest needs were in the smallest groups. That's at the top left of this graphic. So those 18 students were divided among 4 adults. They came from different homerooms. That's what class 1, 2, 3, and 4 are. So they were skill-based groups. And the largest group, 33 students working with 1 adult, bottom right corner. This is what many schools are doing as what I need time, when time, right? It's a little familiar to you, what people are doing for intervention. If you're only doing this for intervention, you might be able to make a little bit of progress with your students, but you might not make the kind of life-altering progress that your students need you to make. And the sooner you do this, like kindergarten, first grade, not that this is a solution, but the sooner that you direct the instructions where the student's skill level is, use your assessment to inform what should your tiered model look like, the faster you're going to be able to realize literacy for all of your students. So this is like writing an intervention plan for your system. It's exactly what we need to be doing. At the district level, you probably have a strategic plan. Your state might require your district to submit a plan. I am trying to give you some variables to think about that will help you to do the hard work you're already doing more effectively and efficiently to get the result that you want to get for your students. You might be thinking about my suggestions as things that sound like a great idea, but it'll never work in my school. This is what I hear from people very often. Yeah, that all sounds great, but we're on our 4th principal in 2 years. We don't have anybody who knows about the science of reading in our school. We have half of our staff is non-certificated folks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the reasons. Those are not excuses. Those are exactly the variables that define your instructional plan. They are exactly what we should be talking about as part of the host environment in the science of reading. What is the context? Looking at that dirty water in the fishbowl and talking about how can we use our resources? How can we work with the limitations that every single school has to get a different result for our students? If you are not changing outcomes for students, there's something in your system that can change for a different outcome. That's what the MTSS model is all about. It's not a set of cookbook procedures you take from a manual off the shelf. It should not be mandated as a blanket, do this first and then that across your district or across the state. It's all educators and all stakeholders within your system getting together to use student data in a structured decision-making model to engineer a system of increasingly intensive instructional support that gives all students to be lifted with literacy. Okay, I have 3 minutes where I can take questions. I'm watching the clock very carefully. Everybody's ready for a break, so nobody wants to get on to answer the question.
I'll do it. I'll be the bad guy. So as you're presenting, I'm messaging my coach and my coach says research states 90 minutes is too long for ELA instruction. So she wants me to actually prove to her,
That 9 minutes is too long. No.
nope, that it's what needs to be.
Okay, so show me research, when people want to throw this around, research that, show me the research and show me your student data. Because that's, somewhere in that mix, between those 2 things, is your answer, right? How much time do you need for tier 1 instruction? It depends. It depends on your students. If you're getting 100% of your students to grade level expectation with 90 minutes, that's the correct amount of time. If you're not, you might need more time, or you might need to use that time better. And I suspect that's it. In my experience, it's not so much about the amount of time you have, it's about how you're using the time. And getting that fit to customize what your students need with that instruction. It's not always whole person. Thank you all for your time and attention, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Really, really appreciate it.
I have a couple of housekeeping items that I would